Well, right now it is time on a Monday morning to bring in Arthur Schwartz, the food maven. Arthur joins us on a Monday. We talk about food, and food. Good morning there, Arthur.
Can we talk about TV a little bit?
Oh, yeah, sure we can. Absolutely.
Well, the reason I'm saying that is that I had a major birthday the other day.
Yeah, that's right. Happy birthday. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you. So I'm trying to get over it. But one of the things I always noticed about older folk, of which I am now, is that we like to reminisce and look back at the... Like, I was watching the Oscars last night. Besides that, I didn't know who most of these people were. I'm out of the loop for pandemic reasons as well. I keep finding myself saying, as my grandmother never said, it's a new world.
Yeah.
So I've been visiting the old world because it's comforting. And one of the things I've been watching is old Alfred Hitchcock shows. Do you remember?
Absolutely.
Yeah. We all remember that it was the March of the Marionettes. Yep. What I didn't remember is that how beautifully produced they were and how he got the best actors of the day on TV, which was not easy to do then. And I forgot how creepy Alfred Hitchcock can be. So, but I've been watching these, and they are comforting, even when they're the creepiest. Although there is one that's sticking in my head, and I wish it wouldn't stick in my head. I'm not going to give away anything. By the way, it's on MeTV, which is otherwise known in New York City as Channel 9. That's another new thing. All these channels have names now. So somebody says, it's on MeTV. What's MeTV? Well, it's Channel 9.
As a family, you used to sit around at TV and watch it, and we would always look for him because he appeared in every episode.
No, he didn't.
He didn't?
What he did was he introduced every episode, and he had a final comment about... I've watched enough of these now to know, Marshall, the format. They all have twist endings or surprise endings, the way Hitchcock is supposed to. But these were all done in the early 60s, and I think that was Hitchcock's creepiest period. It's the same... 1963, I believe, is The Birds. So think The Birds when you're going to watch these old Alfred Hitchcocks, because some of them are as scary as that. Anyway, looking back at stuff, I have decided to read my own books. And I was pleasantly surprised when I started reading What to Cook When You Think There's Nothing in the House to Eat. I had a wry sense of humor back then. It's 30 years now. This is the 30th anniversary of that cookbook. It is long out of print, but I looked it up this morning, and you can buy used copies. And there's actually right now, today, a hardcover copy for sale. Now, this is a cute story. The book was a paperback original. It was never meant to have hardcover, but they printed, I forget how many, a lot, of hardcovers by accident. They were supposed to be only for library purchasing. And I guess a bunch of Bob, who's a former librarian, did a search for me. And in fact, there are a lot of libraries that have this book. But because they offered it in a nice hardcover, libraries are reluctant to buy paperback books. But I was given, since there were so many extras, I was given one. And there's one for sale on some website that is not Amazon, but they refer you to it. So I'm looking through this book, and one of the reasons I was looking through this book is that it's organized by ingredient. There are 52 ingredients, all of which are storable. You can keep them around for a while, so when you have an emergency, like, oh my God, what am I going to make for dinner tonight, you'll have something you can make. Originally, this book was called Emergency Meals, but the publisher, not even my editor, the actual publisher, somebody I never even met, decided that it sounded too much like 911 cooking, which had a bad connotation to him, although I don't think that was so bad either. But it was Emergency Meals what to cook when you think there's nothing in the house to eat. That was totally my mother's kind of phrase. She would say, do you have what to eat? Do you have what to wear? We're going out. Do you have what do you have what to wear? Like that. Very Brooklyn. So I'm looking through the book. I had a lot of lemons. I don't know what I was thinking, but I already had lemons in the house, and then I went to the supermarket. I guess they were a big bag of lemons was at a good price. They're small lemons, though, and but I didn't want to use them, and I wanted to use them before the zest, the rind, gets hard and unusable. So very often I have lemons that are in the house that I can't use the rind. I can only juice them. But I wanted to do something. So under lemons, in what to cook, is a recipe for lemon curd. Have you ever eaten or made lemon curd, Marshall? It is nothing but eggs, butter, and lemon juice, and sugar.
Yes, my grandmother used to. You made
Oh,
it.
did she? Well, it's a very common, and called different things. It's a very common thing to use in pastries. You can like take a baked pie shell and smear lemon curd on the bottom, and then put whipped cream on top. You sort of have heaven in a pie shell. I love cream and lemon curd together. In fact, you can take some lemon curd. By the way, you can buy lemon curd in the supermarket in a jar. And I've never loved it, but it's definitely mixed in with other things or as part of something else is totally acceptable. But I had a lot of lemons. So this recipe actually used up a lot of lemons because, so 30 years ago, I was obviously purchasing much larger lemons than I do these days. Now, I do see big lemons in the supermarket, and they're usually too expensive and blah, blah. But this recipe calls for, it says that each lemon is going to produce about a quarter of a cup of juice, which is not the way lemons are today. I had to use 7 lemons to get that much, 3/4 of a cup of juice. And then I grated the zest as well. And the recipe, fortunately, I write recipes that give you alternate measurements, so even though it said, whatever it was, 3 lemons, parenthetically it said 3/4 of a cup. So I know I really needed 3/4 of a cup. So I used my lemons and the zest from all of those lemons. It only came out to about what the recipe said, which was 2 tablespoons of a grated zest. Now, I am using a microplane these days for doing zest. And with the microplane, it comes out so fine and fluffy that in the end, you don't taste it. You don't feel it is really what you don't do. You don't feel it on your tongue when you're eating the finished lemon curd. However, in the old days, I do remember it being often, a little disconcerting to run across a little piece of zest. So I'm very happy with the microplane. That's a nice development of the last 30 years. There were no microplanes around in 1992 when this book was published. So here's what you do. It's 4, and by the way, I looked up a whole lot of recipes for lemon curd. There are zillions out there on the internet. And mine was a little different. I don't remember where I learned how to make it this way, but I used 4 whole eggs and beat them with 1.5 cups of sugar. Now, I know now, the recipe didn't say, but I know now to add sugar gradually when you're doing this. It's not going to be that really thick, pale yellow I used a whisk. I didn't use a electric beater. I just whisked in the sugar, pouring it in slowly, whisking. And when it's all, and it will be thick and pale or yellow, you then add your 3/4 of a cup of lemon juice and 2 tablespoons of the zest, all stirred together, and put that on top of the stove And then as it's warming up, I add 1 tablespoon of butter. Altogether, I'm going to add 4 tablespoons of butter. And this is a technique that's in my recipe that I didn't see in others, because to add the butter, if you add a tablespoon of butter at the beginning, you'll know that it's getting nice and hot because the butter will melt. And then you add another tablespoon, and you keep stirring, whisking. You don't have to whisk, but stir with the whisk. And keep stirring. Make sure you get into the corners of the pot. If you're using a double boiler, it's safer. But I'm a daring guy. I use a heavy-bottomed little saucepan for this. And you keep stirring and keep adding the butter until 4 tablespoons of butter. Then, and don't add the butter until the last tablespoon is incorporated. Now, I must say, I was proud of this direction. In my recipe, in what to cook, it says you'll know it's thickened to the max when the pale yellow foam on the surface disappears and the curd it's now lemon curd, is totally yellow in the saucepan. In other words, in the beginning, you're going to have a two-tone mixture here with the paler surface and a deeper yellow underneath. When it all becomes the deeper yellow underneath, you know you've done the maximum. And take this off the heat immediately. If you're using a double boiler, take it off the steam bottom immediately and stir for a couple of minutes. And then pour it into, warm still, pour it into a jar, or jars, plural, and that's it. Let it cool to more or less room temperature, and then you can refrigerate it. It keeps in the refrigerator for I don't know how long. I don't think mine has ever lasted more than a week or so. The recipe makes over 2 cups of lemon curd, which is a lot of lemon curd. We had it because, of course, we had to eat it almost immediately as soon as it was chilled down. It'll be very, very thick and spreadable. So what we did, we spread it on, this is very decadent, on those Belgian waffle cookies, butter cookies. The Stroofer is a main brand. I think you know what those are. And you don't need much lemon curd. It's just make like an icing of lemon curd on each one. It's really, as I say, in emergency. By the way, in emergency meals, what to cook. This is something you can keep around and use in a lot of different ways. Plus, it uses up a lot of lemons. So, and lemons do stay, by the way. I keep lemons at least a couple of weeks at room temperature. Even in the refrigerator, they'll keep much longer. But I like the looks of them, so I never throw away a lemon, because even after the shell gets brittle almost, you can still get some juice out of it. In fact, you can get a lot of juice out of it. So that was my experience. The recipe really, as a professional recipe writer, cookbook author, and teacher, it always is a little nerve-wracking to make my own recipe, especially one that I devised 30 years ago and haven't made in many years now. Very indulgent lemon curd. And I saw somebody on TV not even making it, but using it out of a jar, and I guess that's one of the things that got into my head. But while I was perusing my book, I discovered things I had totally forgotten about. Now, by the way, I wrote this book when I was living in West Cornwall, and we at Mutzler's, our general store, had just closed. Tragic tale. I don't want to go into that, but we had no supermarket except in Sharon and in Torrington, which is a schlep. So I would come up for a weekend and have to cook pretty much with whatever I brought up with me. And after a while, I learned to go shopping and bring food up. But I also forced myself at one point to cook just what I had stored in the house. And that's where I came up with the 52 ingredients that you can store. I mean, there are some things that don't store that well. Like there's a recipe for wilted celery soup, because we all buy bunches of celery to make something else, to make something that only requires a little bit of celery, and then what do you do with the rest, kind of thing. Potatoes do not last nearly as long as we wish they would. And by the way, I just read a little article the other day about should you eat potatoes when they've grown eyes. Well, if they've just grown eyes, yes. If they're not green, the toxin that makes green potato, well, whatever it is that makes green potatoes toxic, is concentrated in those eyes. So you just sort of flip them off, and if the potato itself hasn't greened up at all, then you're okay. So one of the things I found, actually the recipe right next to lemon curd in the book, was a recipe for, I called it Oriental lemon sauce for noodles. I'm big on Chinese noodles. This one I'm sure I made with spaghetti, but these days it says use spaghetti or Chinese egg noodles, Maine. Well, in those days, 30 years ago, it was hard to find Chinese egg noodles. Nowadays, you can get them dry in some supermarkets. In any case, spaghetti works very well, or thin spaghetti even. This is one of those cases where I don't mind thin spaghetti. Usually I like thicker spaghetti. But this is nothing to do. This is what to cook and what to make when you have nothing, don't want to cook. It's a quarter of a cup of lemon juice. I think we can all squeeze a quarter of a cup of lemon juice mixed with 2 tablespoons of soy sauce, a couple teaspoons, I would say at least these days, of, now I have finely chopped fresh ginger root, but I would these days grate my ginger root on that handy microplane, and I would end up with 2 teaspoons of grated ginger root is actually quite a lot. I would even go to a tablespoon here. A little bit of sesame oil goes a long way, so a teaspoon or 2 teaspoons of sesame oil, and, of course, the ever-present garlic, which you can or don't have to. If you're Jill Goodman, you don't have to put it in. So, now, of course, I would like something fresh with this, and so if you happen to have some cilantro or parsley, and I have to laugh about this. 30 years ago, I wasn't using the word cilantro. I said fresh coriander, meaning coriander leaves. Let's remember that if you're old like me, you remember that cilantro, which is the Spanish word for the herb coriander, as opposed to the seed, which I guess in Spanish is probably cilantro also. It's called coriander in English. But we used to call it Chinese parsley. So whatever, if you happen to have something fresh to chop on top, even some scallion greens are good. I must say that is very good. So you just mix this together. Lemon juice, soy sauce, ginger, garlic, and sesame oil. Delicious on spaghetti. So by the way, this is a cute story involving this book. I did in those days, it wasn't that hard to get on TV with a new cookbook. And I was invited on Good Morning America 30 years ago. It was starring then, the host was Joan London, and now I'm forgetting his name, but he's still on TV. And Joan London is too, doing advertising for A Place for Mom. But anyway, Joan London is my age. Excuse me. And at that time, 30 years ago, she had just announced getting a divorce, or had just gotten divorced, by the way, from a guy who looks like me. So I'm on the program, and they stocked their TV kitchen with all 52 ingredients that are listed in the book. Cornstarch, corn syrup, flour, eggs, kasha, ketchup, oranges. I'm just randomly picking out products here. Some things that were not so familiar 30 years ago, like bulgur. But anyway, they put all this in the cabinets, and then they came on air with me standing there, and each got to pull off, I forget how many ingredients, and the rest of the program I had to cook with using those ingredients, and blah, blah. Well, of course, one of the ingredients was spaghetti, and I had a line I was using everywhere that spaghetti lasts longer than most marriages. And Joan London glared at me when I said this because, of course, it was big gossip news that she had just gotten divorced. But you know what? It made us friends. And from then, I haven't seen her in years now, but whenever we did see each other, we were very warm towards each other because, of course, she knew it was just a line that I'd been using. Good line, by the way, and it's actually sort of true. I don't know how long marriages last these days, but spaghetti still lasts for years. Do you happen to know, Marshall? In those days, I think it was 50% of all marriages ended in divorce.
It's still right around 50%, but it's a little higher than 50%. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're finding more people aren't getting married. They're living together.
Well, that's true too. I know couples. Couples have been living together for 40 years.
Yeah.
Anyway, my next recipe to make from this book, it's like having old friends. These are recipes I haven't cooked in so many years in general. Well, bananas. We always have a couple of bananas that need to be used, and since Bob overbuys on bananas, and he's the banana guy, I make him eat them anyway. I don't make him, but he knows he should eat them anyway because he's the one who overbought them. But he likes overripe bananas, as do I. And I haven't made banana cake or banana bread in months now. And I look under bananas, and there's the banana shake. I until I went ketogenic, I had all the time as a diet thing, a frozen banana, half to a cup of milk, and a couple of ice cubes in the blender, or an unfrozen banana for that matter, and more ice cubes. But anyway, banana walnut bread. So Bob has been requesting, and he doesn't like any of my newfangled banana cakes that I make, although I do. And he says, I just want a plain old-fashioned banana bread with walnuts. And sure enough, in What to Cook, there's a recipe for banana walnut bread. And I have to say, this was my friend, Alan, may he rest in peace, Alan Damon's recipe that he made all the time. And he gave me the recipe, and it's a food processor recipe. Because 30 years ago, we were still that enamored of our food processors. Sort of everything went in the food processor. But I did a little research on banana bread, and this formula, meaning these ingredients in these proportions, are a very, very common banana bread formula. And some of them call it my grandma's banana bread. And if you look at where the grandmas were from, they were all from New England. And Alan was from Massachusetts. So I think this is the New England banana walnut bread. But Alan just decided to put it in a food processor. When I make this, I think I'm going to take it out of the food processor. I'm a little concerned about overworking a product like this. These quick breads and muffins and things don't do well when they're beaten too much. And the processor would tend to do that. But the recipe, I'm going to rattle off the ingredients because I think I do have a couple minutes here.
Yep, you do.
Yeah. And I know somebody's saying, well, give us the recipe already. So it's 3 ripe bananas. Now, I didn't give a cup measurement of what the mashed bananas are going to be, but I have to say, from my experience, that's a lot of banana. So 3 ripe bananas. I would not make them big bananas. 2 eggs, 3/4 of a cup of sugar. Most of us do have all these things around the house. That's why this is What to Cook when you think there's nothing in the house to eat, because you do have these things. 5 tablespoons of butter, 1.5 cups of normal, everyday, all-purpose flour, a teaspoon of baking soda, a teaspoon of cream of tartar. That's a weird ingredient for me, because usually the only time you use cream of tartar is when you want to stabilize egg whites. A half teaspoon of salt. You know what? This is baking soda and cream of tartar together is basically baking powder. So if you use 2 teaspoons of baking powder, I would say you've done that. But I'm going to go with this. A half teaspoon of salt and 2/3 cup of shelled walnuts. So this goes in a loaf pan, a 9x5 loaf pan, and in a 350-degree oven. It bakes for a long time. But you basically beat together until they're like a smooth puree, the bananas and the eggs. And then add the sugar, 3/4 cup of sugar. And then, now this is all being done in a processor, so he says 5 tablespoons of butter. But I would say 5 tablespoons of soft butter, and then beat that in. And let's see. Then you add the other ingredients, which is a cup and a half. They mix that all together. These days I know how to do this better. 30 years later, I mix all my dry ingredients actually before I even get going. And of course, the walnuts are all measured out. And so you beat the batter together, you stir in the walnuts, and pour it into your prepared pan, meaning I would say both greased and floured. But if you have one of those no sticky kinds, just the flour is enough. The butter is enough. And then it gets baked for at least 50 minutes. I find these things actually go a little longer. You do want to test it with a cake tester in the middle and make sure it comes out clean. And then let it cool before you unmold it. This is very important for all these kinds of baked goods, to let them cool before doing anything with it, including eating it. They're much better after they sit for a while. In fact, this banana bread is better the second day. But anyway, you can freeze it if you want, or eat some and then freeze it. Anyway, if you look online, you're going to find very, very similar banana walnut breads.
All right.
All right. It's a baking day, too. It's only 25 degrees here right now.
Yeah, it's 20 here. Yeah.
Yeah. And my concern is that it really was spring last week. and now all those nice magnolia buds are going to freeze and fall off before they fully bloom.
I think you've got one more cold morning. And
also, no crops around here, but the same thing with crops.
I think you got one more cold morning, and then it's going to be back to normal.
Well, I know, but the plants don't know that.
That's right, they don't. But I'm not a plant person.
It's 24 degrees. They go into a different mode.
Yes. Well, I go into that same mode.
I'm not sure what to eat today. But, my mode is always predicated on the weather. But I have nice pork chops to make today, so I think I'm going to do that.
All right.
And you know what I've been eating a lot of? It's not for every diet, okay? I mentioned this to my niece because she mentioned that her kids all of a sudden like cauliflower mashed potatoes, which are not mashed potatoes, but they're very good. And I just steam a whole head of cauliflower and whip it up in the food processor with 3 ounces of cream cheese and 2 tablespoons of butter. So if you're on a low-fat diet, even though it's cauliflower, this is not for you.
That's
but
right.
if you're eating keto, it's the perfect mashed potatoes.
All right.
Yeah, it's one of my go-to things lately.
All right. Well, I want you to.
All right. Well, anyway, I'm going to have a warm week,
and enjoy the cauliflower potatoes.
and I hope your snow melts.
Oh, it's all gone. Just about. It's all gone.
Oh, it is all. Jill complained this morning.
Well, yeah, because we had a dusting of snow. Yeah, we had about an 1/8 inch of snow, but it'll be gone by this afternoon.
Oh, come on, that's just pretty.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not mud season yet.
No. Oh, we've been through 2 mud seasons already.
Because it thaws.
Doesn't it? Yeah, it's been.
Yeah, well, look forward to another at the end of this week.
Okay, Arthur, I'll speak to you next week.
All right.
Take care. Arthur Schwartz, the Food Maven, here on Robin Hood Radio. You can find Arthur, of course, at robinhoodradio.com. Click on Arthur Schwartz, the Food Maven. Underwriting support for Arthur Schwartz, the Food Maven, Hillsdale Home Chef. More information, 518-325-7000, hgshomechef.com.